parents evicted me to give my room to my sister. Years later, they regretted it. Have you ever felt like an unwanted guest in your own home? Like you're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to make yourself small enough to be tolerated? That was my reality for 18 years after my parents evicted me for my sister. A childhood that wasn't really a childhood at all, but rather a long lesson in how to disappear. The first memory I had of feeling like an outsider in my family came when I was just 7 years old. My little sister Emma had just turned 5, and suddenly, everything changed. It wasn't dramatic or obvious at first, just small things that a child might notice but couldn't quite understand. "Mom, can you help me with my homework?" I would ask, only to be told, "Not now, I'm helping your sister with her coloring." It didn't matter that my homework was due the next day, or that Emma's coloring book could certainly wait. Somehow, Emma's needs always came first. My father wasn't much better. He worked long hours, and when he was home, he was tired. But he always seemed to find energy for Emma, taking her to the park, reading her bedtime stories, laughing at her jokes. With me, there were only exhausted sighs and quick pats on the head. "She's younger," my mother would explain when I dared to ask why Emma got new clothes while I got hand-me-downs from cousins. "She needs more attention right now." But years passed, and nothing changed. If anything, the divide grew wider. Emma's room was painted pink with butterfly stickers and a canopy bed. My room remained the same faded blue it had been since I was a toddler, with furniture that was starting to fall apart. By the time I turned 13, I had accepted my place in the family hierarchy. I excelled at school, joined clubs, stayed late at the library. Anything to avoid coming home to the constant reminder that I was somehow less deserving of love and attention. Then came that fateful day, the day that would forever be etched in my memory as the moment I realized just how dispensable I truly was. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon when I returned from school to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, an unusually serious expression on her face. "We need to talk about the sleeping arrangements," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't understand at first. I had my room, small and neglected as it was, and Emma had hers. What was there to discuss? "Emma is getting older now," my mother continued. "She needs more space for her things. Her dance trophies, her art supplies. You know how creative she is." I nodded slowly, still not grasping where this conversation was heading. "So your father and I have decided that Emma should have your room. It's bigger, and it gets better light for her artwork." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I waited for the punchline, for the explanation of where I would sleep instead. Perhaps I was finally getting a room renovation? Or maybe they were converting the small study downstairs. "You can sleep on the pull-out couch in the basement," my mother finally said, her voice matter-of-fact as if she were discussing nothing more important than what to make for dinner. "Just until we figure out something more permanent." I stood frozen, the weight of those words settling heavily on my shoulders. My parents evicted me for my sister. The thought materialized in my mind with startling clarity. I wasn't just being asked to give up my room, I was being pushed out, demoted, my already tenuous place in the family further diminished. "But the basement floods when it rains," I said quietly. "And there's no privacy. No desk for my schoolwork." My mother's face hardened slightly. "Emma needs the space more than you do. You're always at the library anyway. And you're older. You should be willing to make sacrifices for your sister." That night, I lay awake on my bed, looking around at the room that would no longer be mine. The glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that I had placed there years ago with my father, before Emma was born, before I became invisible. The bookshelf filled with carefully saved-for novels and textbooks. The small corner desk where I had maintained my straight-A average, despite never receiving the celebration that Emma got for her C's. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Taylor. "How was your day?" I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? How my parents had essentially told me I mattered less than my sister. Fine, I typed back. Nothing special. That weekend, I helped move my belongings to the basement. My father carried down the old futon couch that pulled out into an uncomfortable bed. My mother brought down a folding screen. "For privacy," she said, though it did little to make the damp, chilly basement feel like anything but exile. Emma, for her part, was ecstatic. She bounced around my former room, already planning where her posters would go, which wall would feature her inspiration board, how she would arrange her collection of stuffed animals on the windowsill that used to hold my plants. "Isn't this exciting?" Emma gushed, seemingly oblivious to the pain in my eyes. "I've always wanted this room. The view is so much better." I said nothing, just continued carrying boxes downstairs, each one feeling heavier than the last. Not because of their physical weight, but because of what they represented, the physical manifestation of my parents' priorities. That night, lying on the lumpy pull-out bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling above me, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't be forever. Someday, I would have a real home of my own, a place where I belonged, a place where I wasn't an afterthought. Little did I know how soon that opportunity would come, or the price everyone would pay for the lessons Lee. The weeks after my parents evicted me for my sister were a blur of adjustment and silent resentment. I spent as little time as possible in that basement, which smelled of mildew no matter how many air fresheners I plugged in. My grades began to slip for the first time in my life. It's hard to focus on calculus when you're shivering under 3 blankets, trying to block out the sounds of the washing machine at 11 p.m. "Angela, you got a C on your math test?" my father asked one evening, frowning at the paper I'd left on the kitchen counter. "This isn't like you." "It's hard to study in the basement," I replied quietly. "The lighting is bad, and it's always cold." He sighed, that familiar sound of inconvenience I'd grown so accustomed to hearing. "We'll get you a better lamp, and maybe another space heater." "The circuit breaker trips when I use the one I have now," I pointed out. "We'll figure something out," he said vaguely, already walking away, his attention drawn to Emma practicing her dance routine in the living room. In my old room, she had run out of space for practicing her pirouettes, apparently. My mother was even less sympathetic. "High school grades aren't as important as everyone makes them out to be," she said dismissively when I tried to explain how my GPA might affect my college applications. "Emma's dance competitions could lead to scholarships, you know. That's what we need to focus on right now." Right now. Always right now. Emma's needs were perpetually urgent, while mine could eternally wait. I found refuge at Taylor's house. Her parents welcomed me with an ease that made my chest ache. They asked me questions about my day and waited for the answers. They remembered that I was allergic to shellfish and that I loved raspberry tea. Small things, really. The bare minimum of consideration. Yet they felt like luxuries to me. "You can stay here whenever you want," Taylor's mom told me one evening. "We have the guest room." For a wild moment, I considered it. Considered how it would feel to have a real bed again. A door that closed. A window that didn't look out at the driveway. But I knew my parents would never allow it. Not because they'd miss me, but because of what the neighbors might say. The final straw came 3 months after my basement exile began. I came home from school to find my mother and Emma going through the boxes I hadn't yet unpacked. "What are you doing?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the stairs. "Emma needs your old desk," my mother explained without looking up. "Her art projects are getting more complex, and the one we bought her isn't big enough." "But I need my desk," I protested. "I've been doing homework on the floor because there's no space down here." "You can use the folding table from the garage," my mother replied, as if she'd solved all my problems. "That table wobbles, and it's stained with paint," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. Why can't Emma use that one? Don't be selfish, Angela, my mother snapped. Your sister needs proper equipment if she's going to develop her talents. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. And what about my talents? My needs? My mother straightened, fixing me with a look that clearly communicated her impatience. When you win awards like your sister, then we can discuss your needs. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been on the honor roll consistently since 6th grade. I'd placed second in the state science fair last year. I'd been published in a youth literary magazine. None of it mattered. None of it was enough. That night, I called Taylor and cried for the first time since this all began. I can't do this anymore, I whispered into the phone, careful to keep my voice down so it wouldn't carry upstairs. It's like I don't even exist in my own home. Move in with us, Taylor said immediately. My parents already said it's okay. I can't, I replied, though everything in me wanted to say yes. I'm only 16. They'd never let me. Then hang in there, Taylor said firmly. 2 more years and we're off to college. We'll get an apartment together, far away from here. 2 more years felt like an eternity. But it gave me something to hold on to, a finish line in the distance. I threw myself into applying for scholarships, spending hours in the school library researching options. I needed a full ride somewhere, anywhere that would take me far from this house. I picked up a weekend job at the local bookstore, squirreling away every dollar I earned in an account my parents didn't know about. My father noticed my absence, in his way. "We hardly see you anymore?" he commented one Sunday when I was rushing out the door to my shift. "I'm surprised you noticed," I replied, the words escaping before I could stop them. He looked startled, as if he'd never considered that I might harbor any resentment. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, suddenly tired. "I'm just busy, like everyone else in this family." "Your mother and I work hard to provide for both of you girls," he said, his tone defensive. "You provide differently, though, don't you?" I couldn't help but point out. "Emma gets a bedroom. I get a basement." "You're older," he said, falling back on the familiar excuse. "You need to set an example." "An example of what?" I asked. "How to disappear? How to expect nothing? How to be grateful for scraps?" He had no answer for that. For a moment, I thought I saw something like shame cross his face. But then Emma called from upstairs, something about needing help with her costume for her upcoming recital, and he was gone, bounding up the steps 2 at a time. That evening I came home from work to find a small desk lamp on my makeshift bed, with a note in my father's handwriting. "Hope this helps with studying." I plugged it in. It cast a weak circle of yellowish light on the concrete floor. It was something, I supposed. A token acknowledgement. But it changed nothing fundamental about my situation or my place in the family. 2 weeks later, opportunity knocked in the form of an early admission letter from State University, offering a full academic scholarship if I could start in the summer term. I would have to complete some coursework to earn credits before the fall, but I'd have housing, meals, and tuition covered. I accepted immediately, without consulting my parents. I would be 17 by summer, old enough, I reasoned, to make this decision for myself. When I finally told them, I expected resistance. Instead, I got something that hurt far more. Indifference barely disguised as support. "Well, that solves the room situation permanently," my mother said, her relief palpable. "Emma can use the basement for her dance practice once you're gone." And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't just leaving for college early. I was leaving for good. The months leading up to my early departure for college were strangely peaceful. Ever since my parents evicted me for my sister, I'd been counting down the days until I could leave. But now that freedom had a definite date, I found myself observing my family with a kind of detached fascination. It was like watching actors in a play I was no longer part of. Their lines predictable, their motivations transparent, their drama suddenly less capable of hurting me. Emma continued to flourish in her role as the family's shining star. Her dance recital photos replaced my academic certificates on the living room wall. My mother drove her to 3 different specialized classes each week. My father built her a custom shoe rack for her growing collection of dance shoes. The universe of our household continued to revolve around her with perfect, unquestioning precision. Meanwhile, I worked extra shifts at the bookstore, saved every penny, and prepared for my escape. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. In just a few weeks, I would be gone. But of course, it did matter. 18 years of emotional neglect don't just evaporate because you've found an exit strategy. The dam finally broke 3 days before I was scheduled to leave for State University. I came home from my shift to find my childhood bedroom, Emma's room now, with its door wide open. Inside, my mother and Emma were sorting through a box of my remaining possessions, things I'd left in the top of the closet when I moved to the basement. My senior yearbook lay open on the floor. My mother was removing pages with a box cutter. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother looked up, completely unashamed. "Emma needs this space for her memory board. We're just removing a few of your photos to use the frames." I stepped into the room, my room, and picked up the mutilated yearbook. Pages containing my debate team photo, my science fair win, and my creative writing club, all neatly excised. "These are mine," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my yearbook. Those are my memories." "Don't be dramatic, Angela," my mother sighed. "You're leaving anyway. Emma can use these frames for her dance competition photos." "So take the photos out of the frames," I said through gritted teeth. "Why destroy my yearbook? It was faster this way," Emma chimed in, not looking up from where she was sorting through a small jewelry box. My jewelry box containing the few pieces I'd inherited from my grandmother. "That's not yours," I said, snatching the box from her hands. "Mom said I could have it," Emma protested, looking to our mother for backup. "You're going to college, Angela," my mother said, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "You won't need these things in your dorm." "That's not the point," I replied, my voice rising. "These are my things, mine. You don't get to decide what happens to them." "As long as you're living under our roof," my mother began. "I'm not, though, am I?" I cut her off. "I live in the basement. Like some unwanted pet you've grudgingly kept but don't want to see." My mother's face flushed with anger. "After everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me?" I demanded, years of suppressed rage finally boiling over. "Given me the bare minimum? Treated me like I'm nothing more than an inconvenience? Literally pushed me out of my own room so the golden child can have more space for her precious dance trophies? I earned those trophies," Emma shouted, tears springing to her eyes on cue. "And I earned nothing, right?" I shot back. "Not respect, not support, not even the basic courtesy of being asked before my things are destroyed." My father appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" "Angela is being selfish again," my mother said promptly. "Making Emma cry over a few old frames." My father looked at the scene, the cut-up yearbook, the scattered frames, the jewelry box clutched in my hands, and frowned. "Angela, is this really worth upsetting your sister?" And there it was, the question that had defined my entire existence. Is your pain worth upsetting Emma? "You know what?" "You're right," I said, a strange calm washing over me. "It's not worth it. None of this is worth it." I turned and walked out, ignoring their calls behind me. I went straight to the basement, pulled out my nearly packed suitcase, and finished filling it with the few belongings I had left. I texted Taylor, "Can I stay with you until I leave for college?" 3 days. Her response was immediate, already making up the guest room. When I emerged from the basement with my suitcase, my father was waiting at the top of the stairs. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, his voice caught between concern and annoyance. "To stay with someone who actually sees me," I replied simply. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "Your mother and sister were just—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't defend them. Don't make excuses. For once in your life, just don't." He fell silent, his expression unreadable. "I've been invisible in this house for years," I continued, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "You pushed me into the basement and then forgot I was even there. So I'm making it easier for everyone. I'm removing myself from the equation. Angela, we never meant to make you feel unwanted, unimportant, like an afterthought." I supplied, "But you did. Every single day." "We love you," he said weakly. I looked at him for a long moment. "You love the idea of me, the dutiful older daughter who asks for nothing and expects less. The placeholder, the background character in Emma's story." "That's not fair," he protested. "No," I agreed. "It's not fair. None of this has been fair." I walked past him, suitcase in hand. At the front door, I paused and turned back. My mother and Emma had emerged from upstairs, watching with identical expressions of confused indignation. "I hope it was worth it," I said to all of them. "I hope having that room for Emma's dance trophies was worth losing a daughter and a sister." "You're overreacting," my mother said dismissively. "You'll calm down and be back tomorrow." I shook my head. "No, I won't. I'm done being the one who bends, who accommodates, who disappears so Emma can shine brighter. I'm done." I walked out the door without looking back. Taylor was already waiting in her car at the curb, having anticipated my text. As we drove away, I didn't feel the urge to cry that I'd expected. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar: relief. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. I had refused to be erased. 3 days later, I left for State University without saying goodbye to my family. They didn't call. I didn't expect them to. In their world, I had always been optional. 5 years have passed since my parents evicted me for my sister and I walked away from that house, never looking back. 5 years of building a life entirely my own, free from the shadow of being the lesser-loved child. College became my sanctuary, then my launching pad. I thrived in ways I never could have under my parents' roof, where every achievement of mine was measured against Emma's supposed potential. The first year was the hardest. There were nights in my dorm room when I'd stare at my phone, wondering if they would call. They didn't. No birthday cards, no Christmas gifts, not even a text asking if I was alive. Their silence confirmed what I had always suspected. I had been an obligation, not a joy. In their minds, I had fulfilled my purpose, growing up and moving out. And now they could focus entirely on Emma without the inconvenience of pretending to care about me too. I threw myself into my studies with renewed passion. Without the constant drain of fighting for basic recognition, I discovered I had more energy, more creativity, more of everything. I graduated with honors in 3 years instead of 4, landed a competitive internship at a tech startup, and was offered a full-time position before I even finished my degree. By year 2 of my self-imposed exile from my family, I had my own apartment in the city, a job I loved, and friends who valued me for exactly who I was. I had built the home I always craved, not just a physical space, but an emotional one where I belonged without question. It was around this time that the first cracks in my parents' perfect world began to show. Emma, it turned out, wasn't quite the dancing prodigy they had convinced themselves she was. Without me as the convenient backdrop, the reliable, responsible older sister who required nothing, Emma's flaws became more apparent. Her grades plummeted without me to help with homework. Her commitment to dance wavered without me as the audience for endless living room recitals. The work ethic she never had to develop because everything was handed to her left her unprepared for real-world challenges. I learned all this from Taylor, who still lived in our hometown and occasionally ran into my mother at the grocery store. "Your mom looked terrible," Taylor texted me one day. "Said Emma's refusing to go to college, quit dance, and is just sitting at home playing video games." I felt nothing at this news. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a profound indifference. Their problems were no longer my problems. 3 years after I left, the first attempt at reconciliation came in the form of a Christmas card. A generic winter scene with "Happy Holidays from our family to yours" printed inside, as if I was a distant acquaintance rather than their daughter. My father had scrawled, "We miss you," beneath the pre-printed message. My mother's signature was conspicuously absent. I threw it away without responding. 6 months later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. "Angela." His voice sounded older, tired. "I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but things here are difficult. Emma is struggling. Your mother is struggling. We made mistakes with you. Big ones. I made mistakes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just call me back. Please." I didn't. Another 6 months passed. I was promoted at work, moved to a better apartment, started dating someone who made me laugh every day. My life was full and meaningful in ways I never imagined possible during those dark basement days. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find my father standing there, gray-haired and stooped in a way he hadn't been when I last saw him. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. "How did you find my address?" I finally asked. "Taylor," he admitted. "I begged her, told her I wouldn't leave until she helped me find you." I made no move to invite him in. "What do you want?" "To apologize," he said simply. "Really apologize, not make excuses." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath. "We failed you. I failed you. I let your mother favor Emma, and I went along with it because it was easier than standing up to her. I convinced myself it was normal, that you were strong enough to handle it, that you didn't need the attention Emma did." His voice broke. "I was so wrong, Angela. So terribly wrong." "Why now?" I asked, unmoved by his tears. "It's been 5 years. "Because everything fell apart after you left," he said honestly. "Not right away. At first, we told ourselves you were being dramatic, that you'd come back. But you didn't. And then Emma started to struggle without you there. Your mother couldn't understand why her perfect parenting suddenly wasn't working anymore." I almost laughed at that. "And where is Mom now? Why isn't she here apologizing too?" "She's not ready," he admitted. "She still can't admit how wrong we were. We're separated now. Have been for almost a year." That surprised me. My parents had always presented a united front, even if that front was against me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished them unhappiness. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes. I have something for you." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. He pulled a small, worn notebook from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. "I found this when we were packing up the house to sell it. It was behind the furnace in the basement." I recognized it immediately, my journal from those basement days. I had thought it lost in my hasty departure. "I read it," he confessed. "All of it. Your words, they destroyed me, Angela. The way you felt, the things we did to you. Reading how it felt to be you in our house. He wiped his eyes. I will regret how we treated you for the rest of my life. I held the journal, feeling the weight of my younger self's pain in my hands. Emma asks about you, he said quietly. She's different now. Growing up, finally. Working at the mall, taking community college classes. She misses you. I spent my entire childhood missing my parents' love and attention, I replied. Emma will survive missing me. He nodded, accepting this with a sadness that seemed genuine. Can I give you my new number? In case you ever want to talk. No pressure. Just an open door. I hesitated, then handed him my phone. He entered his contact information and returned it without trying to linger. Thank you for seeing me, he said as he turned to leave. You've built a beautiful life, Angela. I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. After he left, I sat with my old journal for hours, reading the desperate words of the girl I used to be. The girl who believed she deserved less. The girl who thought her value was somehow less than her sister's. That girl was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had saved herself. I never did call my father back. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. But his visit gave me something I hadn't realized I needed. Closure. The confirmation that they had, indeed, been wrong. That the favoritism hadn't been in my head. That I had deserved better. Sometimes the happiest endings aren't about reconciliation. They're about vindication. About walking away and building something better than what you left behind. My parents gave Emma my room, but in doing so, they gave me something far more valuable. The push I needed to create a life entirely my own, on my own terms. A life where I would never again allow myself to be made small for someone else's comfort. And that, as it turns out, was the greatest gift they could have given me. Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we deserve. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from those who never valued you and build a life where you are the priority. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who consistently put you last? Or maybe you've been the favored child and only realized it later in life. Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember, blood doesn't always equal belonging. Some people will never change no matter how many chances you give them. The real question is, when will you stop waiting for them to? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of people who found the courage to choose themselves. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.